Some of the most bought FPL players going into game week 3 actually should be avoided, and we're going to touch on those players as well as the ones that you should buy for your teams going into the weekend. So as always, make sure you drop a like on the video, aim for 300 on this video, and of course, if you're not already, make sure you do subscribe to the channel for daily fantasy content. Enough waffling, let's get into today's video. So first up, I know the video is called Game Week 3 Buy or Avoid, but I'm going to cheat a little bit here and tell you a player that I think you need to sell in your FPL teams. It's going to be no surprise that that player is going to be Christopher Nkunku at 6.4 million. Yes, he did have his price drop, and it looks like he could have another one before the Game Week 3 deadline. So I wanted to quickly touch on Nkunku, especially for those managers right now that still have him in your teams and you're looking at one of those right now. So first up, why should you sell Nkunku? Well, he's had limited minutes in both matches. Came off early in the first game, only had 7 minutes in the second game. And as we know already in this Chelsea team, they're a competition for places. Chelsea have 152,000 players registered as their first team, and there is going to be competition each and every game week for Nkunku, in particular in the shape of Palmer, Felix, and Pedro Neto. Now, in the previous game that we saw for Chelsea, we saw Mudryk play off the left and we saw Madueke play on the right. If we are to see that continue, or at least Neto take the place of Mudryk, and we have the assumption that Madueke is going to operate on the right wing, we have Nkunku, Palmer and Felix fighting out for that number 10 role in that Chelsea team, and that is a big concern for somebody who is priced at 6.4 million, a decent amount of our budget. We can't be making the mistake of keeping a player like this in our FPL teams who is going to be a risk each and every game week. And as I said there, it's just too damn expensive. Other players like Barco, for example, who's a 4 million defender, we can keep third on the bench and just let it rot until we wildcard. This is too expensive to let that happen. Now, big question is, should you sell him? Yes. When do you sell him? Now, a lot of managers have already shifted him out their teams, and I absolutely get it because he needs to go at some point, and avoiding those price drops is sometimes more important than getting the right player. And that's what I'm saying here. Game week 3, if you know exactly the player that you want to go to right now, popular picks include Smith Rowe and Morgan Rogers, who we are going to touch on in this video, and of course Madueke, who again is going to be part of this video. Then you go there. I think you get it done because this is a player that eventually gets sold, whether it's game week 3 or game week 4. However, I do also think rolling the transfer in game week 3 and giving yourself a bit of flexibility in game week 4 might also be a logical move. We have a few fixture swings in game week 4, the likes of Brighton, for example, that enable us to have some cheap alternatives in the midfield that we don't really want to buy in game week 3. So while Nkunku is definitely a sell, I also think you could wait until game week 4, maybe ride out a couple of the price drops, but get yourself the right player in your teams and gain one more game week worth of information. Sometimes that could be more key than jumping on maybe the wrong asset, but don't get me wrong. Selling Nkunku is the right move, just make sure you do get the right player. Now, sticking with Chelsea, one of the most bought players going into game week 3 is going to be Madueke. He's had a price rise already to 6.5 million. Slightly a bit unusual there because he actually had a price fall to 6.4 when he wasn't selected in game week 1. Now had a price rise back to 6.5. So he's where he started this season, and we can fully expect him to go to 6.6 million before that game week 3 deadline. So he is being bought by a lot of FPL managers. I do think he is a good buy for your game week 3 teams, but I'm personally not as sold on him, and I want to go through some of the points, both the pros and the cons. So of course, the one thing we need to note about Madueke is not only did he have a good game week 2, but he had a fantastic preseason under Maresca in that American tour, one of the standout Chelsea players, scoring plenty of goals and really adapting to that Maresca system. And when he did get his start in game week 2, he absolutely capitalised with that hat-trick against Wolves. And let's be real, any player that scores a hat-trick is naturally going to draw the attention of FPL managers. The thing that I really do like about Madueke is he certainly is a Maresca winger. Anybody that watched Leicester last year will note that they had wingers very similar to Madueke. Great ball dribblers, players that can operate wide and really drive at teams. And being left-footed on that right flank really does add to the appeal of Madueke. And we have seen Enzo Maresca come out after this game and also say the same things, that he really does like Madueke and he really hopes he does stay at the club. And I think we all do now expect him to do so. The problems, because of course there isn't always just pros with a certain player. I do think there is the potential for this to be Nkunku 2.0. We need to remember that this Chelsea team have so many players available, and I wouldn't be surprised if they secure another transfer like Osimhen before the deadline. Madueke right now is the natural fit for that right-hand side, but what's to say in a couple of weeks' time we don't see Cole Palmer moved out to the right to accommodate as João Felix in the number 10 and Pedro Neto out on the left with Nicholas Jackson operating down the middle. That can absolutely happen. I really do feel like all it takes is 1 or 2 bad game weeks and a player will come out of that Chelsea team and suddenly become a minute's risk. They have too many fantastic players for so little places. So while I'm not sitting here saying that he is going to be a problem like Nkunku is, I do think all of these Chelsea players, barring Cole Palmer, have the potential to also be minutes risks. And also I want to say here as well, it is a little bit of a knee-jerk transfer. He only played game week 2, scored a hat-trick off an XG of 0.92. So he didn't put up the most incredible numbers. Other players actually put up better numbers, but we don't see us rushing to those players necessarily. So to conclude, I think it's a great option. Cole Palmer is my number 1 pick in that Chelsea midfield, but I do think at 6.5, there is going to be one of those that does emerge as the go-to pick. It isn't Nkunku, but Madueke could be that man. If you want to do Nkunku to Madueke, you know the risks. There is going to be potential rotation later down the line, but if we're striking for game week 3, I think he absolutely starts. And against a Crystal Palace team that are really struggling this season, it is a great short-term option that could turn to a long-term option if he does secure that spot in the team. Let me know if you're one of those 500,000 managers that has already bought him into your team. Now, on the subject of midfielders and Nkunku replacements, 2 of the most popular budget enablers out there is going to be Fulham's Smith Rowe and Aston Villa's Morgan Rogers. Thankfully, I own both of those. But from an actual overview perspective, I want to take a look at these 2 players to understand which one right now, if you were to buy one, is the preference. Now, Smith Rowe's slightly more expensive at 5.6 million. At the time of recording, Rogers is 5, but there is a chance he could be 5.1 million very, very soon. And rightly so, I think both of these are brilliant budget enablers for your team and great buys for your game week 3 teams. Now, looking at the fixtures first and foremost, because when we're looking at budget enablers, I think we need to obviously lower our expectations a little bit. We're not looking at Mo Salahs, Sons, Fodens. We're looking at these players that in favourable games we can bring into our starting 11 and do a job for us. And if they can deliver an attack and return like Smith Rowe done in game week 2, then happy days. Now, thankfully, both of these teams actually have really favourable fixtures. Aston Villa come into a great run of Leicester, Everton, Wolves and Ipswich. It feels like it's really a fixture swing for Aston Villa right now. In terms of Fulham, they've had a good game last week. They've got Ipswich, West Ham, Newcastle and Nottingham Forest. I would argue the fixtures for Aston Villa are slightly more favourable, and I would just say in general that Aston Villa are probably more of a team that I would back over the next 4 game weeks from a consistency perspective. We of course need to take into account the return of the Champions League around game weeks 4 or 5 for Aston Villa, and that could impact the minutes of Morgan Rogers. But right now we have seen back-to-back 90 minutes for Morgan Rogers, so I think there's no reason to believe that he is suddenly going to get dropped in this game week 3 fixture. And we saw someone like John McGinn come off before Morgan Rogers, which is always an added bonus. In terms of Smith Rowe, we had the quotes from Marco Silva previous to game week 1. We knew that Smith Rowe's fitness needed to be built up, and we were expecting early substitutions which have come to fruition. But the 10-pointer in game week 2 is giving us a taste of what we could have in future fixtures. Now, looking at the underlying numbers, I don't really want to deep dive too much into these because let's be real, it's only been 2 games, but the shot volume for Morgan Rogers is good, 2.5 per 90 minutes. But Smith Rowe being in amongst the XG at 0.3 per 90 minutes. I do like the fact that Morgan Rogers also has a bit of creativity about him. 2 attempted assists per 90 minutes is good. 0.5 big chances created per 90 minutes. And anybody that actually watched Aston Villa will know that Morgan Rogers has been one of the best players on the pitch, let alone as an Aston Villa player. And I think right now, if I was looking to buy a player brand new going into game week 3, I would actually be a bit more inclined to save the money, go for someone like Morgan Rogers. He's been fantastic in the opening 2 game weeks, so unlucky not to pick up any sort of attack and return, which his performances have justified. I do think Smith Rowe will score more goals than Morgan Rogers, but I think the minutes are better with Rogers. I think the fixtures are better. I think the team is better. And for that reason, being the cheaper option, I think Rogers is more of a priority buy than Smith Rowe. However, if you're in a position where you own Rodgers and Nkunku but not Smith Rowe, I think you can easily downgrade Nkunku to Smith Rowe for your teams and have Rodgers and Smith Rowe as a bit of a rotating pair each and every game week. So I think both of these are a great buy. Now, on the subject of budget enablers, I needed to draw your attention to Aston Villa's 4 million defender in Nedeljkovic. I believe it's pronounced like that. So this is definitely a player that you need to have on your radar as a buy going into game week 3. First and foremost, the reason being is a player that you need to avoid in game week 3, and he's one of the most bought players, is going to be Leicester's Wout Faes. Now, there's no confirmation that he's officially leaving the club, but looking at these quotes right now, it does sound like he is asked to leave Leicester, and that is a huge red flag if you're looking to buy him fresh. I know right now that he's one of the most bought players because he obviously got an attack and return in game week 2. People are obviously flocking to him at 4 million. And I think he is a complete avoid in your teams. And with Barco now being off to Sevilla, Johnson a rotation risk at Ipswich, now we got Wout Faes not an option at 4 million. Nedeljkovic is one that you need to consider if you're looking at a 4 million alternative. Now, kind of the stars have aligned right now. He had a great preseason, but Matty Cash ended up stepping in at right back in game week 1. But we've now had confirmation that Matty Cash is injured and could be out for up to a month, which means the door is open for Nedeljkovic to come in for game week 3, game week 4, and potentially game week 5. And being a cheap enabler, this is a great opportunity for managers, especially if they're looking to maybe wildcard around game week 6, when that kind of coincides when Matty Cash is expected to return, and the fixtures are brilliant over that period. If you go for Nedeljkovic at 4 million, you can get Leicester away, Everton at home, and Wolves at home. And this is a player that has really been hyped up by the Aston Villa fan base for a while, saying that he's actually an improvement on Matty Cash. It's just the experience that he's lacking to justify being a starter each and every game week. Now, there is, of course, slight risk. We haven't actually seen him fully in this Aston Villa team week in, week out. So there's always going to be that risk of rotation in this team because we've seen Konsa play at right back at times. We then go into a back 3 and allowing their left back, which likely will be Ian Maatsen, bombing on and influencing the final third. But right now, it does sound like Nedeljkovic is going to get that right back role for himself, and it's basically his shirt to lose. And if you want to go for an Aston Villa defender, I still think go for Pau Torres or Konsa is the safe pick. But if you're stuck with a 4 million option and you're looking to go sideways with no money in the bank, I think the risk is worth taking with this option, getting yourself a piece of that Aston Villa defence and having these brilliant fixtures coming up. But what is worth noting is Wout Faes is absolutely an avoid going into game week 3, and this one is definitely a consideration to buy. Now, another popular player that I am surprised is being bought by so many managers, honestly hundreds of thousands, is going to be Danny Welbeck, currently at 5.6 million, possibly going to be 5.7 come this game week 3 deadline. And I honestly am very surprised at this one. Now, it's worth noting, Danny Welbeck has had a really good start to the season. 2 goals. He's got 14.86 expected FPL points, which is the second best of all forwards. Obviously, Erling Haaland is the one that is above him. And he's got a better XG than that of Pedro, his teammate, at 1.04. So same price as João Pedro, but putting up better numbers than him. And the minutes have actually been really, really good for Danny Welbeck. Also, being at this price point is a brilliant cheap enabler. Maybe for those managers that currently have a Dominic Solanke, maybe looking to sell someone like an Alexander Isak to free up some funds. Welbeck with his opening 2 games, the performances that he's put in, the signs that we've seen from Brighton, it does feel like a really good investment to go for someone like a Danny Welbeck. My big concern is that game week 3 is away against Arsenal. It is a terrible fixture for him. And I also think there is plenty of competition for places in this Brighton team. I know Danny Welbeck has had a good start to this season, but them signing Rutter, having João Pedro, I do think there is going to be future minutes risks for these attacking players. And realistically, you want Danny Welbeck for game week 4. If you're buying him for game week 3, I kind of get it if it's part of maybe a double transfer combination. If you're downgrading Alexander Isak to Danny Welbeck to free up funds to maybe improve one of your midfielders, then I can kind of get behind it, and he isn't necessarily an avoid. But realistically, I think personally, if you're going to be buying a Brighton attacker, I still think it is João Pedro to go for. I know the numbers haven't been as good, but I have more confidence in the minutes of João Pedro going forward than that of Danny Welbeck. And even though he's been good, this is a guy also that, I don't want to be a stereotype, but he has got a terrible injury record, and I would not be surprised if he does pull up sooner rather than later. But again, that is a narrative that you can take which way you want to do so. So for game week 3 in isolation, this is a player that you absolutely have to avoid coming up against one of the best defenses in the league. If you're looking long term, great for game weeks 4 and 5, but 6 and 7 really isn't that favourable. For me, I think it is an avoid. I would much rather go for João Pedro, even though the numbers are slightly worse. I have more confidence in him. But if it is part of maybe a transfer combination, then I don't mind it. But I just don't think it is the right game week to bring in Danny Welbeck into your teams. And the final player in today's game week 3 buy or avoid video is going to be Luis Diaz, midfielder currently at 7.5 million. And the reason why I've included this video, because I think there are quite a few managers out there that are currently sat with an Nkunku or maybe a midfielder that they're not happy with. And also a bit of money in the bank, maybe downgrading someone like a Solanke in a previous game week. And whereas some managers are maybe looking to go sideways to maybe an Eze or a Matoma, I really do think Luis Diaz needs to be considered as maybe a double up in your Liverpool attack. Now, the game week 3 fixture is not ideal away against Man United, but I also feel like Liverpool are controlling games so well in pre-season and in the opening 2 game weeks. I wouldn't be surprised if Liverpool do win this game against Man United, even though they do have a bit of a bad track record against them recently. 1.63 XG for Luis Diaz, 1.09 expected assists. He has beaten both Diogo Jota and Mo Salah in both departments. He had his rewards in game week 2, but honestly, game week 1 could have been so much better for Luis Diaz. And I think if he did deliver in game week 1, this guy's ownership would be through the roof. It's only now that managers are really looking at these numbers thinking, maybe Luis Diaz was the one to go for at this price point. As I mentioned, the short-term fixtures are fantastic. Yes, game week 3 isn't amazing, but I also wouldn't be surprised if Liverpool were to score a couple of goals against Man United. Then they have got Forest, Bournemouth, Wolves, Crystal Palace, and even Chelsea at home in game week 8. I think this is a player that you could bring in your teams and keep for the long term and have no problems with it whatsoever. And I also do think if you're a manager right now that avoided Mo Salah, it does feel like the goals are really being spread out in this Liverpool attack, even though all of them are putting up fantastic numbers. And if you've avoided Mo Salah, having Diogo Jota right now is a little bit scary, thinking if you can keep up with Mo Salah's numbers, even though Jota is putting up great. Why don't maybe we just go for the double Liverpool midfield and have Jota alongside Luis Diaz for the next 3 or 4 game weeks? I really do think that is a viable strategy that we need to consider for our FPL teams. Now, of course, is there a slight risk of rotation? Yes. We have seen Gakpo come in and steal some minutes from Luis Diaz. Darwin Núñez can play off the left, but right now I think Luis Diaz is playing way too good to be even a rotation risk in this team. And I think we are seeing a return of the front 3 in a Liverpool system. This could be the constant of Diaz, Jota and Salah with some late substitutes for the likes of Darwin Núñez and Gakpo. I think Diaz is playing too well to be a rotation risk. The one thing I will say is some will say game week 3 is a bad time to buy and maybe you could postpone the transfer to game week 4. But I do think if you're in a position where you're looking to sell Nkunku, you already have Rodgers, you already have someone like a Smith Rowe, and you're really desperate to bring in a player, I think Luis Diaz is a fantastic transfer for your teams, and you just put him in and know that you have him for the next 4 game weeks. And it's something that I personally am considering right now as a double up with Diogo Jota. Yes, guys, that's going to wrap up today's video looking at the players that you should buy or avoid going into game week 3. Hopefully, I've covered off the most part of the players, but if I have missed anybody, please do put them in the comment section. I'll be sure to answer and give you my thoughts on those particular players. And of course, if you do want to stick around for more content this week, we're going to go through my team selection, a wildcard draft, and more. Make sure you do subscribe to the channel, and of course, drop a like on today's video if you did enjoy it. Have an amazing day, guys. I'll see you real soon. Take care. Cheers.